the Australian capital city saying, help yourself. The message is the same. Interestingly, you might see there are a number of changes occurring in Indigenous affairs at a federal level in particular. We've had things like the audit that's been announced. We've also had Amanda Cuddly Bear Bandstone, who I believe is a South Australian. Not that I want to blame you. She's also been pushing the line that, and more recently Mel Bruff as the new minister, but they've been pushing the line that that self-determination for Aboriginal Australians and Indigenous Australians is a failed experiment, social experiment, and we have to go back to another way now. Was it Mel Bruff? No, it wasn't Mel Bruff, it was Abbott. Abbott, who used the word...
new paternalism.
That's right, that was the term used, that there should be new paternalism for the way we deal with Indigenous Australia. So there are major changes occurring there. Okay, let's now sort of narrow. We've gone sort of broad. We're starting to come back. Let's have a look at what's happening in our profession. The first thing is that, and this is not just our profession. This is professionalism. Period. Is that the term has become eroded. It doesn't mean for most people what it used to mean. You know, even a plumber will advertise themselves as the professionals. Right? Now, you might argue that it still means a term about the quality of service, but it certainly doesn't necessarily mean a specialised knowledge and skill base. It actually tends to mean more about a standard of service. That's a quite important point. There's also, and Karen Healy's certainly done a lot of work on this, looking at the Australian situation and how it compares to overseas. There's been a deprofessionalisation of client contact. What do I mean by it? What does she mean by it? What it means is that more and more in welfare bureaucracies, one of the ways, not just welfare bureaucracies, welfare and human services programs, there's been more and more of a push to have the professionals doing the higher work and growth in often unpaid or relatively unskilled workforce that does most of the work directly with clients. That's an important change. Right now, you know, they'll be support workers or direct care workers. But one of the arguments is that it's actually started to denude the moral legitimacy of social work and other human service professionals in their role of direct change agents. Okay, so instead we sit back and do the assessments almost like psychology does. You know, make the assessments and then write prognostications for other people to do the work. And if you couple that with the sort of stuff about the shift from casework to case management, you can see that maybe social work roles in contemporary Australia aren't quite the same as they used to be as far as us being the change agents. There is reduced autonomy and power. I've already mentioned that. You know, it's a constant battle at times trying to get through, for many social workers, trying to get through programs or services for individual clients when you're battling against managers who have the overall say about how much will be given. It's a constant pressure. Right across the board in the human service, but it isn't just the human service. This actually occurred in business as well. There is a blurring of professional boundaries. Right? So, you know, what exactly the psychologist or the psychology trained person as against the welfare professional degree, as against the social worker, the OT, where those, you know, where one set of skills and knowledge starts and ends, and where another starts and ends, is pretty difficult to tell. This has been driven a lot by organisations in changing from, you know, positions that were called social worker or psychologist or OT to instead going for generic titles, things like mental health worker or youth support worker. And arguably, it's what needed to happen, because you can argue that in fact those rigid professional boundaries that there were part of the problem. Quite often what you'd have is that there were people who did have the skills and knowledge or experience to be able to do particular roles, but were disenfranchised by professional qualification boundaries or requirements. So it's not just a sort of sense of, oh, the nasty employees did this and shaft us. There were reasons, there were quite good reasons why it was done. And particularly I've got to add in here is that was absolutely necessary for rural Australians. About a third of Australians live in rural areas. And they have been particularly, for those of you, I won't bore you too much with it, but across a deep range of health and social indicators, rural Australians are doing it a hell of a lot worse than urban. In fact, those figures yesterday about the kids, one of the reasons it was put forward about why Queensland and Tasmania were so high was in fact they had higher proportions of people living in rural areas. And there's been all sorts of trouble trying to recruit a range of helping professionals in rural areas. Okay. There's also, and this has particularly been in health, but not just in health, it's also now certainly occurring in child protection. There's been turf wars about knowledge and skills, about who was the legitimate owner of the knowledge and skills necessary to do a particular work. Now that said, there's been a lot of focus, I think, in social work as a profession and the AASW in particular, on what the differences are, what sets us apart. The reality, I think, if you step back, there's a hell of a lot more that we share in common with a range of helping professionals than what separates us. And that's an important point I think that we need to hold to hold in our memories. And if, for example, if you have a look at the ethical practice standards, they tend to be pretty much the same.